Backbend alignment class. In this segment here, we will be looking at the backbend alignment for Locust and Bow. And this kind of goes in order with what we have been looking at with mountain pose against the wall, and then camel on our knees against the wall, right? The big difference is that instead of being against the wall, we'll be lying on our mat. But all of the same principles now come into play here, and all of those things that we looked at when we were standing are all the key things that we need to address when we're lying on our mats. So again, remembering some key factors here, feet being hip distance apart, so 2 fists between our ankles, so that our hips and our knees and our ankles are all in alignment to allow that tailbone to drop down. And then again, we're focusing on that by allowing the tailbone to drop. That'll allow that low spine to have the natural curve that we want to enhance in the back bend. And then the upper back bend, which is the lifting of the rib cage, right? So we want to make sure that the shoulders get lifted, shoulder blades draw in toward each other and pull down the spine so the rib cage lifts up. And then our belly will be pressing into the mat, and the tendency is to just let the full belly press into the mat. But what we really need to focus on is drawing that belly in toward the spine so that we engage this core and stabilize the pose. Otherwise, we're just kind of letting our back not snap in half, but it's not allowing it to lengthen fully and bend. So we want to fully support throughout the entire spine. And so it's really important to draw that abdomen in to lengthen out that full spine. And then, when we looked at our feet in the standing pose, they're hip distance apart and parallel, we're rooting through both of our feet evenly, so our toes are lifted and spread. Likewise, in our locust pose, our feet are off the mat, but we're pressing out through the balls of our feet as our toes lift and spread. So this gives us our full engagement of our feet. And then our arms, just like in our camel pose, or a mountain against the wall, right? Our arms can be along our sides, our arms can be cactus, they can be straight out, they can be behind our back and clasp them even. But whatever arm variation you select, you always want to make sure you select an arm variation that isn't going to hinder your shoulders from fully opening, right? So if you're going to have them extended and you're going to curl in, then maybe you want to have them cactus out so that you can accentuate your shoulder blades drawing in and pulling down toward the spine. So always being mindful that whatever your arms and hands are doing, it's going to cause that ripple effect through your shoulders, which will then impact what your hips are doing. So being mindful of that. And then finally, what is our chin doing, right? One of the biggest issues with back bend, as we talked about in camel, people drop their head back. So we don't want to lead with our chin. We want that gentle tuck of our chin. So we're lengthening through the back of our neck and then up through the crown. So it might appear that we're not actually coming up really big, but that's very irrelevant in the sense of everybody's spine has a different flexibility, and all we're doing is accentuating the bend, the natural bend of our spine. And everybody's spine is different. So being, just being mindful of that and honoring where your body is at is really important. Okay, so coming on to our mat, I'm gonna get to showing you. I'm gonna do it through on the side, and then there's a couple of things I wanna hone in on, which is primarily with the leg and then our chin. So if we're on our mats, again, we want to make sure our feet are hip distance apart and parallel. And I am going to pick on this in a little bit after I go through this. But again, we can easily, just like I said in camel, just kind of bring our hands behind us and kind of judge before we spread ourselves out on our mat. So I know that it's more or less hip distance apart and parallel. My feet are flat and my forehead begins centered. I'm going to have my arms along my sides
So if my arms are along my sides, my palms are facing upward. If my hands are out in front of me, they're going to be facing down, likewise with cactus arms. Alright, so I want to start engaging my muscles. I'm going to lift my toes and spread them. That means that my legs are going to start to be active. As I do that, then I'm pressing through the balls of my feet. And I want to start engaging my quad muscles. My quad muscles are lifting up and away from my kneecaps. With my next inhale, as I lengthen my spine, I'll lift my shoulders and my forehead comes off the mat. As I exhale, draw my shoulder blades in, pull them down my spine. You can see how much my forehead lifted away from the mat. My palms are flat, fingers are spread wide. And now I want to draw my belly button in toward my spine and start to squeeze my thighs in toward each other. That action movement, right? That stabilizes everything. That allows the pelvic floor to slide forward. Notice that my chin is not tucked in like this, but I'm also not leaning forward with it. It's just a gentle tuck, so my neck is nice and long and I'm reaching out through the crown of my head. And as I breathe through this, my pose will grow. And I'm going to exhale and release. And as we do bigger back bends, so the reason why this back bend tends to be a deeper back bend than standing mountain against the wall, or like a standing camel, or a camel against the wall, is because your legs are lifting away. So you're accentuating not just the top
bend, the rib cage lifting, but you're also likewise accentuating that low bend in the lumbar spine. And that is a very weak area of our body. And we don't use that or engage those muscles in that way any other time, right? And one of the great ways of developing those muscles in the low part of the spine is doing a locust flow with your breath. So you're not focusing on how high you lift. You're just focusing on a smooth, continuous movement of inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. And you'll notice that if you do that, the more you do that, you will kind of work on the muscles there and you won't have that same kind of muscle fatigue feeling in your smalls of your back. And I want you to recognize that there's a difference between muscle pain and muscle fatigue. And muscle fatigue in your low back is very normal when you're working on back bends, especially if back bends are something that you struggle with, or you're just kind of introducing yourself to. You're going to be just developing those muscles. So you want to honor wherever your body is at for that reason. But also you want to build the muscle strength. So doing that locust flow is a really great way of doing it. And then also the tabletop position, that other series that I've been working on with Jackson. Holding in your tabletop position and working on some of the things that we're slowly working through will help develop your entire core strength and stability. Okay, so picking apart, first of all, our feet. So what I often find in people doing Locust is instead of having their feet hip distance apart, which as I said, you can always check by bringing your fists between. So when I come out, my feet are straight, right? They're not curling in, they want to be straight. But what I always have a tendency of seeing is people doing this, right? And this is what you don't want to do, because if your legs are wide, you are going to, that's the same as doing like a really wide camel, right? And you don't have any stability in this middle part of your body, and you're just gonna be leaning into it as opposed to actually lengthening and opening up the back bend. So you want to avoid having your legs really wide. It's very important to have them hip distance apart. The other thing that you want to focus on is your bum cheeks. You want your bum cheeks to be engaged, like the muscles, the various glute muscles. You want them engaged, but you're not clenching your bum cheeks. If you're clenching your bum cheeks, you are kind of thrusting your pelvis forward, but in doing that, you're actually closing off the tailbone. So you're closing your hips inward and your tailbone gets jammed. And so then you won't be able to lengthen your tailbone and open up that lower part of the bend. So it's really important to really focus on squeezing your thighs in toward each other, that action movement that we talked about a couple of times already. And with that, your bum cheeks the muscles are engaged, so they're toned, but they're not clinched tight, right? There's a really big difference. And you really want to work on that. And the best way that I advise that you do that is starting off small, right? The lower your back bend, the more you can really hone in on that muscle articulation and development, and be mindful of what your body is doing. And over time, allow the height of your back bend or the depth of your back bend to just naturally happen. When you force a back bend to happen, you're not actually allowing the spine to grow into or expand into that space, right? So again, just to reiterate that, your feet are hip distance apart and parallel, so about 2 fists between your ankles. And your feet are going to come straight back, not sickle in, straight back. And we don't want them wide, because if they're wide, you're going to be more of like something that's pressed down into the mat with arms and legs sticking up, as opposed to your spine bending. So feet are hip distance apart and parallel, straight back, arms along your sides, or however your arm variation will be. And then as I come up, I'm going to inhale and lift up. I'm pressing out through the balls of my feet, toes are lifted and spread. My quads are lifting away from my kneecaps. I'm lifting my shoulders with my inhale. As I exhale, shoulder blades come in and pull down my spine. Drawing my abdomen in and then engaging those inner thighs, drawing them in toward each other to stabilize. Now I'm just going to breathe into the pose. So my bum cheeks, the muscles are engaged, but they're not like clenched in. And then releasing. And then likewise, if we're coming up into bow, you're bringing your hands to the outsides of your feet, but you want to keep your feet engaged. So you're not curling your feet in. I find people have a tendency to point their toes here, but you want to have your toes lifted and spread and your hands in the middle, across the top of your foot, right? And when you come up into this, your knees stay parallel to each other. Oftentimes people do this, and you can see it appears that I came up higher, but as soon as I did that, I could feel that right across here. And what's happening is everything is jamming there because I'm closing off because my knees are too far apart. So you want to keep your feet hip distance apart, which means I'm not going to come up as high in my bow if I'm coming into it, right? I'm going to be actually lengthening my spine and breathing into it. So locust and bow are the same. I'm just binding my hand with my foot. And I'm making sure that my knees stay parallel to each other, keeping all of the same muscle engagement. If my knees come out wide, then I can't actually draw my thighs in toward each other and engage anything in my abdomen and my pelvic floor. And that's a big part of lengthening the spine and opening up my back bend. All right, and then the last thing is your chin, right? As I said, so making sure there's a big difference between lifting up and breathing here in alignment, and then notice, if I do this, I feel a lot of pain going across the back of my neck here, but it appears I'm coming up higher, but all I'm really doing is now, instead of jamming the low part, I'm jamming the top part of my spine. So it's a very superficial lifting because it's just your chin coming forward. So you want to make sure that that chin stays. Just a gentle tuck in of the chin so your neck is nice and long and the spine can grow upward. All right, I hope that this video was helpful in achieving a safe and comfortable locust or bow for you. And I look forward to seeing you in the next alignment video. I think will probably be bridge.